Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marcia Leonard. All right, Maxwell Pitts. I cannot express my gratitude and how excited I am to have you on Elemental Energy. I'm going to let you introduce yourself here shortly, but I wanted to give everybody my view on you before you take over. I want you to understand that he is truly a leader in developing the energy transition here in the United States. What he is developing commercially to support the energy transition is delivering a more sustainable world for all of us. He is the brain behind our amazing partnership as low carbon energy sector leads. And I cannot say enough good things about Maxwell Powerhouse Pitt. That being said, Max, please introduce yourself further.
Marcia, that was a fantastic introduction. I think you nailed it. You and I together, just leading the industry from a sector basis, looking at low carbon energy. Thank you for having me on the third episode. I feel honored. Really appreciate that. Yeah, just to give you a little background on myself, I'm based here in Dallas, Texas, and over the last few years here in Dallas, but overall, I've been in this industry being the engineering, procurement, construction industry for the past 20 plus years now, actually going on 21. And my career really progressed with a large engineering corporation is actually based here in Irving, Texas. And from there, I spent quite a few years at that company and really started my energy transition career and looking at sustainability with that organization. Over that course of the period, looking at different ways to get into more sustainable opportunities and had the choice to join another company. And this company is paramount in looking at sustainability. But overall, if you look at my background, I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina. I went to Auburn University, so War Eagle, traveled across the country, lived in different spots across the country, been across the globe, all looking at really renewables, right? And so, through the progression of my career, I'd been in finance, I'd been in labor relations, believe it or not, here in the States, looking at, different union projects, but really got involved in sales early in my career, went through that progression. And, I've been in the outside sales business looking at power generation and really sustainability since 2007 is when I really started outside sales. So I've been at it a while and so appreciate it and look forward to the conversation here today and talking about, renewable energy, talking about sustainability, talking about decarbonization, talking about how we're going to save our planet 1.5 degrees, 2050, all of the things that matter to not only myself, but to you as well, Marcia. So thank you for having me on this awesome podcast, your baby. And I look forward to seeing where this goes. And hopefully one day we look back on this and say, the third episode was one of the best. So over to you.
So, what's very serendipitous, Max, is that 3 years ago today, you and I were submitting a very large EPC solar bid. Did you ever have the vision that you and I would be here today working together?
It's kind of crazy that you said that because it's amazing how time flies. But I can tell you 3 years ago when you and I were working on that proposal, it was one of the largest proposals that as our new organization was working on, right? And so it was a huge project. And I think the very first time I met you and interacted with you and started, talking about this energy transition and climate change, I knew that you and I were gonna work together. I really did. Just thought the world of you. I love your passion, not only for what you do, but for the environment. You and I talked a lot about, the different things that we want to achieve as far as helping the energy transition. But I think it goes back to the number one thing for you and I, and that is we want to do our part to try and change as much as we can, not only for the environment, but for our family, right? And for our children. I think that's the most important thing is for our children to be able to say, our parents helped in the energy transition, making this world a better place. And not only did they succeed, but now I get to enjoy, cleaner air, cleaner water, but now my children can as well. And so it goes on through the generations. So yeah, I knew day one when I met you, we were going to work together.
Well, that's awesome because I felt that same energy, pun intended, from day one as well. And I'm super thankful that we are here because I think that we are doing such an exceptional part. And to further our position on sustainability and climate change is what I like to do is I want to remind you of our audience is we're really trying to enlighten the conventional energy mindset to help them transition a little bit. And so one thing I like to do is deliver some climate change facts. And so you and I are going to go through a round of did you know? Okay.
Ooh, ooh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready. I love this kind of setup. So yeah, let's get to it.
Max, did you know the ocean absorbs carbon dioxide?
I didn't know that, actually. I did not.
It absorbs around 25% of emissions. And with increased CO2 emissions, it's heating and it's becoming more acidic.
That I believe.
Here, I'm going to give you one. Did you know Auburn's mascot is a tiger?
I did. And I think if you think about what you just said there and me, introducing myself and saying war eagle, it gets quite confusing to folks. So I'm glad you brought that up. The tiger is actually Auburn's mascot. The war eagle and the eagle itself is our battle cry. So war eagle again.
Man, see, this is how we vibe off each other. We enlighten one another.
That's right.
Okay. Did you know, going back to our previous comment about the ocean absorbing CO2,
Mhm.
did you know the ocean's heating directly correlates with the intensity of hurricanes?
That I did know.
Due to the warmer sea surface temperatures, it's been shown that they're not necessarily more hurricanes occurring, but the levels of category 4 and 5s are intensifying and becoming more prevalent.
I tell you, yeah, I knew that as well. Yep, absolutely.
Another one. Did you know that during the pandemic in 2019, it has been the only time in history since the Industrial Revolution that our CO2 emissions dropped 7%.
Interesting. No, did not know
Just
that.
just dropped in general. When everybody
Yeah,
stopped driving and when everybody started to take a little bit different approach to life, our carbon emissions dropped. Pretty impressive.
I think so. I mean, yeah, that's pretty staggering to be honest with you, and really a telltale sign, right?
Goes to show how much our vehicles and our carbon emissions from transmission is a huge portion of that CO2 emission relation.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Did you know Auburn has been competing in football since 1892?
I did know that.
That's amazing because I didn't know.
I did know that, and I think, going back to the battle cry and the war eagle, the actual mascot and that battle cry took place in the late 1800s, where Auburn was playing Georgia, and a golden eagle flew over the field as Auburn was losing, and an audience member said, "Look at the eagle, war eagle!" And lo and behold, Auburn came back to beat Georgia. So that's how the war eagle battle cry started.
I am trying to imagine what football players wore, like literally wore when it comes down to head protection. Like, here's a great segue. When it
Okay.
comes down to technological advancements, isn't it smart to do something and to implement a better practice if there is a better product out there?
You probably heard it growing up with maybe your parents. My father certainly told me to work smarter, not harder. Right. I think, yeah, if you look at the last industrial revolution and what was put forward and the technology advances that have happened since then, it's quite amazing to think about. And I think that's probably leading up to maybe some of our conversation around this next green industrial revolution, right? So yeah, look forward to getting into that.
Actually, I let's do that because the
Let's
question I
do it.
wanted to ask you is
Sure.
when did you realize that we were in the second industrial revolution?
It's a great question. I think for me, just chasing from a sales perspective, some of the conventional power plants and power generation plants that you see throughout the world, but certainly here in the United States, really a pullback on coal fire generation, right? Not so much as far as natural gas power generation, kind of around the 2018 period that it used to be, from an expansion standpoint. And what I started to see was a shift, even though it was already happening from a renewables perspective, right? And it was going on long before, the 2010 timeframe when I really got it started in renewables. But as the technology was advancing, right, the solar panels, the turbine blades, the turbines themselves, and these wind farms, I think that's really when I started to realize that, renewables could be a really good opportunity to kind of shape our future around climate. Some of the very early stage solar developments, and I'll just take an example here in the United States, they were on a smaller scale, right? They were more of a pilot plant, if you will. They were, 1 megawatt to up to 5 megawatts from a solar perspective. And I'm talking photovoltaic at this point. But I think from there, getting involved in renewables and chasing projects, and I say chasing projects, being able to provide services, right? Engineering and construction services to say, that next industrial revolution maybe not happen, or it wasn't necessarily happen in 2010, but you could kind of feel the momentum, right? That was happening. So you had these smaller pilot plants on solar. You had, smaller wind farms onshore. There was a big push in Europe, to look at offshore wind. So all of that, kind of really kickstarted, I think, the green industrial revolution, right? And a good example of that is, in 2010 to the 2012 timeframe, right? The solar projects, and again, solar as this example, we're on that, 1 to 5 megawatt kind of stage. And those projects weren't really thought of as utility scale, right? I think everybody talks about kind of utility scale being, those large enough plants that can provide a certain geography, a certain megawatt of electricity, right? And so in the 2012 timeframe, right, you saw these smaller projects. You started the buzz was utility scale is here and now, and it's going to stay. And the very next year, you started to see progress to really get to these large scale facilities that we need in order to really make an impact in changing our climate, right? And protecting ourselves against, some of the things that you mentioned earlier on around sustainability. So these 5 megawatt projects, right? Every year we're starting to increase, and they were skipping large amounts of megawatts. So instead of 5, now the next year in 2013, we were talking about 50 megawatts, right? 14, you're talking about 100. The next thing you know, here we are today, right? And what we're looking at in the United States and other parts of the world, but particularly here in the US, we're looking at half a gigawatt, 500 megawatts. We're looking at a gigawatt, which is just unbelievable, right? And these are huge projects, and it's all, to the solar point, it's all photovoltaic, well, mostly photovoltaic solar. And so you can just see in the time frame that I just mentioned, in the past 10 to 13 years, right? We've gone from little, we'll just say little baby projects to massive utility scale renewable projects that you need. And I think you could say the same correlation with the wind industry as well, and some of the onshore things. But I want to talk about really maybe around the 2018 time frame, right? Where you saw, now you're at what the industry refers to as utility scale projects, right? And I'm talking about across all renewables now, where you started to hear, things around kind of what is that next wave going to look like as far as helping our climate, right? You started to throw in some of the policies that you see not only here in the US, but globally, the Paris Accord. You started to really hear about 1.5 degrees, right? For carbon emissions, and getting down to that level. And it's across the board. You've got, world energy summits that, the greatest minds in the globe are meeting together to talk about climate change. And then, looking at what's predominantly our biggest emissions, right? And here in the US, the coal fire, right? Coal fired power generation, and some of the policies and governmental regulations that come with that, right? And so you started to see a shift where, okay, there's this coal-fired baseload generation. It's a heavy polluter. How are we going to put in a mix to kind of help and backfill those coal-fired generation facilities? And then you pair in and you layer, what you said about early stage, looking at the transportation industry and all of the emissions that come with that. And so two of your biggest polluters, coal-fired generation, transportation, how do we change that? And then you started to hear about the early days of green hydrogen, right? And green hydrogen is powered by renewable energy. It could be solar, it could be wind, and powering that next industrial revolution, right? Attacking the transportation industry from an emission standpoint, early days, right? 2019. But it didn't go just across the transportation sector. Then you started talking about other industries, like, take for instance the steel industry. It's heavy fossil intense, carbon intense to produce steel. And so then you had steel companies talking about, well, how can we become more sustainable? And so I think the march, for the green industrial revolution was emerging, during that 2018, 2019 timeframe. And now we're at a place where, if you look at everything that's being talked about in the industry and the market, particularly the power industry, and particularly, I would say, the oil and gas industry, is how can we reduce our carbon emissions? How can we be more sustainable? And here is a
Electrify.
electrify, exactly. And here is a fantastic molecule in hydrogen that, has always been there, but now there's ways in order to make that a reality from a green hydrogen perspective, to talk about another energy source with hydrogen. And from that energy source comes new ways of producing electricity, like you said, but really cleaning up because it's zero carbon, cleaning up other industrial applications and how really the emergence of power and electrification, to your point, started it, right?
Yes.
So I know that was kind of a long-winded answer, but just really showing the progression of, what I really enjoy and what I'm really passionate about is renewable energy, right? I mean, I've been at it a while now, and the amount of energy that we're going to need, is around renewables to really make an impact, and building these large scale projects are what's needed to get us there, right?
Max, we are lucky to have you. We really are. It's
Thank you, Marcia.
I
Likewise.
I look where we're at right now, specifically with this podcast and elemental energy, and I'm trying to introduce people slowly to the thought of electrification. And I hydrogen, I want to introduce a little bit further in the future. So I want to go back to we talked about solar PV and how it comes into the grid. What
Mhm.
does our future look like? In my opinion, I feel we're going to move away from you know, these industrial large power plants out in the middle of nowhere into the distributed energy systems, the smart grids. I feel like that is the future for electrification because of how much more efficient it is and how much more reliant it can be for smaller communities. What is your opinion on DES, distributed energy systems, which companies with BESS, battery energy storage systems? Just give me your insight on that because right now our transmission and distribution lines are just, they're almost obsolete. They can't handle the load. Like there is could be a huge upgrade that would have to happen. So, what are you thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's another part of the equation, right? That you've got to. So now we've been building up renewable energy, right, and these large scale plants. But how do you get the electrical load to the population? And you're absolutely right. These, some of these large scale power generation projects that I mentioned, especially on a coal fired basis or a natural gas fired basis. Of course, you don't, in a city standpoint, you don't want those plants in cities, right? So then you have to have an electrical load or line to get it there, right? So the transmission lines themselves, if you look at the U.S. infrastructure and there's all kinds of information on this. So I'm not telling you anything that's not in public forum, but it's a true fact that, we've got an aging infrastructure here in the United States, across the globe, really. And the amount of investment that's going to be needed to really take this renewable energy to population centers, we're going to need to increase that as well, right? So I think from a grid standpoint, Marcia, there's still a need for the transmission capabilities that we see in a lot of the regions and a lot of the states and owned by, some of the utilities here in the United States and other type of organizations, right? I still believe that there's a real need for that type of generation for some our transmission lines. So a utility can provide, generation to the mass electricity to the masses. But as you see some of the energy systems that you just mentioned, the grid systems that you just mentioned around distributed energy and around battery energy storage, now you have the opportunity as an industrial nation, right, to look at different ways to get the electricity to load centers where you don't have these long sweeping lines of transmission lines, these massive distribution centers where you can actually have a microgrid, right? Where it could be stationed for, a city population. It could be an application around, neighborhoods where a certain generation source is going to be able to provide enough electricity to power maybe a community. And so I think you're going to see and what we've already seen. So why don't I just say DES is here. That battery energy storage is here, right? And I think, with the availability and optionality around that future in microgrids, then it's going to allow us as consumers to potentially be, I would say, to look at ourselves as, being sustainable around ourselves, where we can provide our own load center and we don't have to rely on others, right? So we call that kind of behind the meter, right? In front of the meter is normally, major utility providing you as a consumer the electricity, or providing, some industrial application electricity. Right now, let's just take your home, for example. If you wanted to put up solar panels and some other technology like inverters to store it, you could go off grid, right? And that's kind of behind the meter as a simplified look at it. So you can be self-sustaining. And then again, going back to these major grids, right, where you talk about these long lines of transmission. On those long lines of transmission, you have line losses, you have electrical losses, right? So not all the power is getting, to the load center that you want to fulfill. And so these shorter microgrid type applications will really, if you plot them down in the source that you need, it's a direct tie-in, right? So it's gonna rid, our nation, the globe, of having these transmission lines that some people don't like looking at, right? Now you're not going to need them. So it could be better for everyone.
Energy efficiency is what
Energy
our
efficiency.
that's
Yes.
what it's coming down to is
Reliability.
we're
Yeah.
we're upgrading our football helmets from the
Yep.
1800s to 2023 and beyond. Like, that's how
That's
I
right.
kind of see this. Like, why not
Um,
adapt to technology that's becoming more efficient and better for everybody?
yeah.
So,
It's an advancement, like you said. Absolutely.
Max, I think that you and I could probably I know that we could talk all day because we really do, and I enjoy
Yeah.
it so much. But I want to wrap us up with the question of what do you want to tell people who are currently in the conventional energy side who do not get to see this low carbon movement like we do firsthand? What do you want to tell them to help bring them on board, get them on the bus, start thinking about electrification and day-to-day operation? Just what do you want to highlight to our audience? Because it's all of us to deliver this.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to take all of us around the globe. I know that there's a need for some of the conventional technologies because, Marcia, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So you're always gonna need some base load generation. And I'm not advocating, that we never build those types of applications. I don't want to build coal, obviously, because it's one of the largest emitters. But what I'm saying, like natural gas fired facility, right? We're going to need that because you go back to that reliability statement, right? So, sun's not shining, you're not going to get power. So there's a need for both. But what I tell people, let's just say this is the honest truth, right? So if I go back in my career, early in my career, coal fired plants were still being built. And quite honestly, before I had kids, I was I was probably more pro coal and building coal plants
All about
and not.
that clean coal. You remember that
Yes, clean coal. It was clean coal. So yeah,
clean
that
coal?
you're saying that. But I think once you mature, certainly for me as I matured in my career, but as I matured personally, as I got married, as I had kids, I started to realize that, it's not just about me, right? Because my thinking was a little bit selfish when I was, in sales. I wanted to sell these big jobs, right? And so I pulled back my selfishness. I looked at, at the time, my little babies, right? My daughter and my son. And I said, well, how can I make a better world for them? And making a better world for them is really looking at my position on things and just taking a different track and a different view on it and saying, you know what? There's reports out there that, that say climate change is not real, right? There's that side of the house. Well, you know what? Even if that's untrue, why would we not want to save our planet, right? What is the harm in not building a coal-fired power plant and building, just as much wind, offshore wind, building as much photovoltaics and solar to, you know, look at our outlook on life and being able to provide a better life for so many that need power generation and these microgrid applications, these small scale solars that you can put in, third world countries to help the children and the families of that in order to have a better life. So for me, that's what I'm about. To be honest with you, Marcia, is building a better life, and I'm going to sell engineering and construction services as much as I can in the renewable space, in the decarb space, in the sustainability space to not only help my family, but to help other families.
My corporate hippie heart is doing somersaults right now.
That is the greatest tagline ever, by the way.
Oh, right?
I think it just, just fits you so well. And I think you need to trademark that, to be honest with you, Marcia, if it's not trademarked already.
Oh, always with excellent advice too, Max. Okay. Max, I cannot thank you enough for joining me today on elemental energy. And I think I speak for both of us when I say connect with us. Connect with us. If there are questions that you have, like my LinkedIn, I am Marcia Leonard, Marcia. Just talk with us, help us develop this community. And as you can see with Max and myself leading some of this low carbon energy work, we're making it happen. We are doers and we need everybody else to be a doer as well and to get on board. So as always, stay happy and be safe. And Max and I wish you well. Any
Thanks for
closing
having me,
remarks?
Marcia.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you nailed it. Right. So, yeah, let's get out there and help change the world. Marcia, thank you so much for having me. This has been a complete pleasure. And I wish you all the success with your podcast. And you are doing great things, not only for the community that you live in, but for the world in general. So keep it up.
Thank you all so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you're notified every time a podcast is released. Find Elemental Energy on Facebook and connect with me, Marcia Leonard, on LinkedIn. But lastly, and most importantly, share this podcast with your family and your friends, especially if you are in the energy industry and you're having an influence on the path of decarbonization. I'm on this journey figuring things out, and I want you guys to come along. So the closer I can get to you and the more I can connect with you, the better this show will be and become. Okay, so you start to see the vision now, right, of what I'm trying to do?
Oh, yeah. I love it.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I have a feeling that truly taking the corporate hippie tagline and blowing it out of the water is going to help elevate me.
Like so. I think the corporate hippie. How can you incorporate that?
It's one of my taglines. So, like, whenever you post it on Buzzsprout and Amazon and all the podcasts,
Yeah.
like, you can tag it, and it's one of my taglines.
I
But
love it.
I feel like that my next branding session, it might be like the corporate hippie. And then, do you see my logo?
Yeah, I love it. That's really cool.
So, you want to hear the story of it?
Tell me.
What does it look like to you, just right off the bat?
I mean, it looks like a new portal, a world, a portal world or something. Yeah.
It's a fingerprint.
Oh,
And if you like see it really closely, there's a tree ring, like there's bark around
I
it.
see it now. That's pretty sweet. Yeah.
And it's the triangle to incorporate like God's plan is bigger than mine, the Trinity.
I
And
love it.
it's pointing down because that's the way we've got to work to decarbonize. So like
Yeah.
when I started elemental energy, like when I started really thinking about it, I was like, I have to do it. Like we have so
Yeah.
much intuitive insight right now with where we're at, and we have to get other people on board. So
Mhm.
thank you for being a part of it.
I love it. You're welcome. Yeah. Let's do it again at like episode 503.
Yes.